terminology is the hardest thing for a coach. It's like, okay, scheme, you can kind of fit in if you have the right experiences, but like, it's now like all the words are different. So trying to memorize the terminology for the first practice. So that's been my first week. And then, also start plugging away with some relationships that I have in recruiting. So it's kind of been a whirlwind. But it's been fun.
Welcome in on this Wednesday. That is Chris Partridge, Michigan linebackers coach, on his return to Michigan over the last 7 days or so. A return in the last 7 days or so of the former Wolverine Jim Scarcelli, who's on the screen right now, and we are happy to welcome him in. How you doing, Scar?
Hey, I'm doing good. You watch the roads out there today. It's rough out here in Michigan, man. Be safe out there, but it's a good day to be sitting home listening to a couple smart guys talking Michigan football. Chris Partridge, good to see him aboard. He's talking terminology. It's interesting, Denny. You can have 10 different programs talk about one play, and they all have a different name for it. They got different terminologies. And I remember when I was had that brief stint with the Raiders, going from Michigan, it was like, okay, they're saying this, but I meant this in Ann Arbor. So it's the exact same stuff. You just got different words. So that's the thing as a coach and as a player, you got to understand what the heck you're talking about so the kids know what they're talking about. And terminology, that's one thing as a coach, every coach has to say the exact same things all the time to the players. You can't have one, the position coach talking about saying this, and then the offensive coordinator calling it this, and then the kids are confused. So every coach has to use the exact same terminology to describe, whatever it is you're teaching the kids. Because I've been through that, and the kids confused because one guy's saying one thing, one guy's saying another thing, and it was just interesting to hear him talk about that because it's vitally important.
I always wondered when a new coach, a new coordinator takes over, whether it's in college or pro, why don't they keep the same terminology? Because I always hear the quarterback saying, yeah, well, we got to get the terminology down. And then after they do it a year, they say, yeah, now that I got more familiarity with the terminology, I'm thinking, wouldn't it be easier for the coach to stay with the terminology that was there so it'd be a smoother ramp? But they don't seem like they do that. They call their own things. I think they just get used to that. I mean, how many times a wide receiver just coming down the line for a screen? I call that a wide receiver screen. But, I'm watching a broadcast on a Saturday, and I'll hear these guys say, well, there's a smoke screen, or there's a smoke screen. And then this guy yesterday I was listening to was calling it, kept saying a wide receiver tunnel screen. And I'm thinking, that's got to be the same.
Bubble screen. I call it bubble, and just like jet sweep or fly sweep. It's the same exact play, only, people use different terminology for it. So,
well, the counter trade, you like to call it at Michigan. What do you call it? This is what they're doing. You don't call it the counter trade.
Well, it's all power terminology, power scheme. It's down block, kick out from the. It's all the same kind of stuff. Coach DiNardo calls it gap on television. I hear him call it gap. I know in the hardball terminology they call it power. But you got to have your terminology consistent, and you can have breakdowns if you got mistakes there.
Well, let's see if we can talk in clear terms about what we are going to discuss today. Michigan's defense and its coaches. I think that's pretty straightforward for everyone. Also, we will look at with spring practice underway on Monday. We'll ask the coach, the player or position group that he is keeping an eye out during this Michigan 23 spring practice. But we will start with the Michigan co-defensive coordinator, Scar. I know you know by now, went out and interviewed with the Philadelphia Eagles for their vacant DC job. And there's a picture of, as the players call him, Coach J, just on Monday, talking with, I don't know if they're going to call him Coach P or not, but Chris Partridge just on Monday. But the news about Minter interviewing, I saw that confirmed on the Maize and Blue Review. So we know that he's talked with the Eagles. What are your thoughts about Minter interviewing with the Eagles?
Well, he's got a pretty long record of as a coach. You know, he's coached 4 years with the Baltimore Ravens, so he's got pro experience, a lot of years in college. He's a marketable guy. He did some good things as an assistant at Baltimore. Good job at Vanderbilt. Real good job at Michigan. So his name is out there. Now, Philly lost both their coordinators, and Minter understands the college game, defending the college stuff, which you're seeing more and more of in the pros. So it's a good thing for Michigan. You hate to say it, but it's a good thing for Michigan that when you win, people want your coaches, people want your players, people want your coaches. So, that's a good thing. The other thing that you got to also think about, Denny, is when I was a head coach, I used to interview every year for other jobs. I just did it. I just always wanted to be sharp with the interview process. I used to tell my assistant coaches to do the same thing, so that when they had an opportunity to, for a head coaching job, they knew how to go through the interview and they were ready. So I used to do it almost every year. So is he going through it just to stay sharp? But that's a big job opportunity. I give credit to the Philadelphia Eagle coaches and the leadership there, because Minter is a good coach. That's exactly the kind of guy I would look at. He's proven now. He's done a good job at last 2 places he's been. I'd hate to lose him, but if Jim is doing the things a great leader does, you always have plan B ready to roll. You always have your next guy, on deck, prepared, ready to go. So if it happens, you'd like to think Clinksdale is ready to go. We got Mike Elston, been around forever, ready to go. Jay Harbaugh has been around. He learned the defense. So I don't think our defense would miss a beat, to be honest with you, because I think Danny, I got to get back to that terminology real quick. I know I'm going long here. Okay, when Don Brown was coaching our defense, and now you move in with McDonald, now you blow up all the terminology. That's when you blow everything up. You just tell the kids, we're going to start all over, because it was a totally different scheme. But when we went from Mike McDonald to Minter, you changed nothing. You changed absolutely nothing, because everything was the same. Because I was a player when we went from McCartney to Moeller. We changed nothing. The terminology stayed the same. The scheme stayed the same. So anyway, it's the sign of a good program. If we lose them, I'm not losing any sleep, because I think we got good guys on deck. But that's where I stand on it.
Thanks to mgoblue.com for that audio. When Josh Gaddis 2 years ago won the Frank Broyles Award for the best assistant coach in college football, I thought he deserved it. And then when he left, I think a lot of Michigan fans, because he didn't leave in the greatest terms. A lot of Michigan fans were like, good riddance. You can put anybody in there. This is Harbaugh's offense anyways. And then it was Matt Weiss. And then Harbaugh was I want to say he was quick. He decided that he was going to have co-offensive coordinators. I don't know to say he was adamant, but when it came down to anybody asking him a question, well, who's ultimately calling the plays, he made a point of saying it was a collaboration between Matt Weiss and Sharon Moore. And he said the same thing on the defensive side. Now, maybe it was Jesse Minter at the controls, or maybe it was a collaboration like Harbaugh said. Joe Klatt was obsessing about it during one of the games on the offensive side, because nobody said too much about the collaboration on the defensive side. So maybe to your point, Harbaugh already having the plan B. His plan B was, put in there last year when he was calling these coordinators co-offensive coordinators, where it was the Weissmore offense and it was the Minter Klink defense.
Danny, defensive staffs I've been on a part of, it's the same thing. We'll look at together. I don't know how many, high school, you don't have as many coaches, but you'll have your 3-4 guys. You look at a team. You all look at the same film, and then you'll say, okay, what do we want to do? What do we want to do against this formation? What do we want to do with that personnel? They got this great receiver. What are we going to do against him? What do we do to stop the quarterback? Blah, blah, blah. You go through everything, every formation, every player, and as a group, you talk about it. Defensive coaches will talk about what we're going to do. Okay, and they'll knock it around the room and let's do this and let's do that. And you'll fight and you'll punch and you'll yell about this and you'll yell about that. And no, we should do this. But the defense, there's got to be one guy where the buck stops here. Okay, and that would be, you know, whoever is the defensive coordinator. So anyway, but you have a collaboration on defense. Now, when the game starts, and you got to make these calls within, you know, 8-10 seconds. You don't have a lot of time to be getting information, you know, to getting opinions, but you are getting them. And I guarantee you, Minter and Klink and Elston and they were communicating, and then they're going to communicate at halftime. I guarantee you, there's that collaboration, but you got to have that one guy, you know, who's eventually making that. But you do have a collaboration. That is happening with every coaching staff. And then it's just a matter of how much input does the leader take from his assistant coaches. I took a lot from my guys. I wanted to make, just like Jim, I think Jim does it because he wants to have his guy feel a sense of ownership, you know. That's why he likes that term collaboration, because it gives the assistant coaches a sense of ownership. It probably makes them more marketable if they're looking for jobs too, you know, like, yeah, I was part of the offensive development or the defensive game plan when we did this, you know, when a guy goes in an interview. So I think that stuff's all good from a leadership standpoint.
You know, Scar, 2 years ago, I think I've got this right. You said that Mike McDonald was going to be the key to the Michigan season and what he's going to be able to do on defense. And then as things got going, you were talking about just how impressed you were with Mike McDonald and the 3-4 and the attacking defense and just what Michigan was doing on that side of the ball. I think I got that right. And then, you know, there wasn't anybody that thought that Minter, you know, when you realized and you just looked at who Michigan was losing last year, like Aiden Hutchinson, like David Ajabo, like Dax Hill, you know, hitting up front. People weren't talking about that Minter was going to be able to go in there and you know, stay the course and be as productive as Mike McDonald. And yet Minter went in there and hit a home run. He was better.
Danny, you used one word there. You said people. People were – well, I wasn't believing that because I knew the kind of players they had back. I believed they were going to be just as – if not better, because they had year two in the program. You got to remember those, you know, the techniques they were, you know, football is football for the most part, but the Don Brown scheme and techniques, they're different. Now you had 2 years of everybody running the same schemes, you know, perfecting the techniques that the McDonald Minter scheme is asking for. So, you know, there's going to be an upside. Year three could be better yet, even more, that we're, you know, 3 years running all those things. So I just want to throw that in there about people, because I wasn't one of those people.
Okay, that's like, it seemed to make sense that the Michigan defense was going to take a step back last year because of the talent. They lost the number 2 overall pick. If David Ajabo would not have gotten injured, he would have been a first-round pick. Dax Hill was a first-round pick. Chris Henton was a loss in the middle of the defense. Those were guys that were going to be tough to replace. Brad Hawkins had made a lot of plays the year before at safety. He made the play at the end of the Nebraska game. It was one of these things that I remember talking about it, saying, who's going to be the players that are going to make the plays at the end of the games? Because we and all the guys that I just mentioned made the plays, and we just didn't know. And I thought that it was going to have to be the offense more that was going to be, you know, carrying the weight more than the defense, because it's hard to replace all of that top end talent. But I know, like, that's where I put it as people, besides Scar, you know. But
Danny, I'm going to say this real quick. I think our defense, I've said this, I think our edge position group could be a slight notch better than it was last year, and every bit as good as that Hutchinson group. I firmly believe that. The edge group with this kid we brought in from Carolina, Coastal Carolina, I think our linebacker group could be the best we've had in 3 years. We're going to have depth. We're going to have a lot of players there with experience. And I think our secondary could be as good. And I'll get into that one group you want to talk about that. I think our D-line inside is the only position of concern I have. We got a couple good ones, I don't think we have the depth that we've had in the past. We're going to see if some of these guys develop, but I see our defense just continuing to be solid, man.
Let's get some questions in here for you. Matt is hunkering down for 8 to 12 inches of snow, but he's sitting in front of his wood-burning stove, listening to his favorite podcast, Go Blue, and he's saying stay safe out there with the storm coming. Here's AJ with some questions and directed the first one right at you. Do you think, Scar, it's possible for Michigan to roll out 2 offensive lines? Could it be a good strategy to wear down other teams even more? And have you ever seen a team do that? Interesting question.
No, I haven't really seen it. You know, the one thing a lot of coaches, I don't know that I'm one of them, but a lot of coaches always seem to believe that the one position group, the offensive line, has to play together and not rotate a bunch of guys in for that continuity, the communication that is demanded of that position. We're going to have at least 10 good players that can play in our offensive line. There's going to be serious competition this spring for those 5 position groups. There's, you got the transfers that came in. You got guys like El Hadi and a lot of these guys that were ready to step up before the transfers stepped in. Then you got the returning starters. You didn't know you were going to get Zinter and Keegan back. So I don't know that I've never seen that, but we have the kind of depth where we could honestly do it. I mean, we really do, especially early in the year with some of those games. We could, because I think our offensive line group is going to have some serious depth with some really good players that we could plug in there.
It's an interesting thought. I've never seen a team do it either. Like you see teams when, like in a non-conference, and it gets to be a lopsided game, then they bring in the second unit. And sometimes you think, wow, why don't they bring in the second unit a little bit earlier so they can get maybe some reps against the other ones, or at least more important reps. I always wonder, but it seems like coaches, almost all of them, not only do they stay with their 5 best offensive linemen, but they're reluctant even to put the second group in there. You know, it could be 3, 4 touchdowns. And I don't know, I think that it might have to do with something like the conditioning for the players. The players want to play.
It's a combination of the conditioning, and then it's just getting those reps together, because you're going to get some different stunts, some different looks, even if you're up a lot of points from these early games we're going to play next year. You want to get as many different different things that your offensive line might face. I told you when I played in the Coach Bo's deal was, I don't care if we're up 40 points. He wanted everybody playing at least 3 quarters. So that was his, and I took that same philosophy as a coach too. Even though we were up big on people at times, your guys, they have to be able to get the conditioning ready to play a full game, because the big games, the tough games, you're going to have to play a whole full game. You're not going to be out at halftime. So that was the Schembechler philosophy. But we're going to have to develop a bunch of depth in those first 3 games like we did last year. I'm sure we'll do that.
Oh, Scar using the Schembechler philosophy. What a surprise. You already said, if people that are just joining us talking about the possibility, you're not saying that Jesse Minter is leaving. We all know that there's a possibility that he could. Scar said that if he does, you can see Steve Clinkscale sliding in there, who he was the co-defensive coordinator last year. But what about this point from AJ? Do you think Harbaugh would consider going back to John, his brother, to find another Raven guy to keep the system going? He doesn't want to see another system, assuming Jesse.
You know how I would answer that question?
How?
All of us are working stiffs, that we work for somebody and we got a chain of command, and we all would like to think that we're going to work for the company that promotes and hires from within, right? You pay your dues, you grind, and then you eventually work up, and I don't know, what Jim has done both. Okay. He promoted more from the offensive side. Weiss took off, Weiss is gone, and now he just moved up. He moved up Sherrone Moore. So that's hiring and promoting from within. Now Clinksdale has been there. So I don't know what Jim's going to do. I do know that if you want to recruit great coaches to your coaching staff, and you want guys to come and want to work with you, that you'd like to think you have the reputation as a guy who hires and promotes from within. So I don't know what he's going to do. I would, I'm not in those meetings. Okay. He knows how, listen, but I've been there too as a leader. Okay. Where sometimes, of course you'd like to promote from within, but sometimes the guy just, you just don't know if he can step up, and you might have to do some other things. So I don't know what Jim's going to do. I would like to think that we have the reputation at Michigan that we are going to promote our guys from within. That's the way it was at Michigan in my years, in my era, that we didn't miss a beat. We just went from McCartney to Moeller, Moeller to Lloyd Carr to Jimmy Herman, and it was just the same. It was from within. So you keep that continuity, and then you also motivate guys to want to work in that kind of an organization.
Yeah, I think that Andre's just making the point about the co-coordinators like Sharon Moore and Matt Weiss, and there wasn't really a lot of people like, oh, can Sharon Moore handle being the offensive coordinator? I think most people were like, yeah, he can, because for that, I don't know if it was 24, 48 hours, maybe even longer than that, it looked like that it was a real possibility that Jim Harbaugh could be leaving this year. So there was the idea of who is going to be the replacement. And it looked like it was going to be Sharon Moore. So I think people are like, well, if Sharon Moore is going to be the head coach, why couldn't it be the offensive coordinator? A lot of it, when it comes down, is just what you think of the person when you hear him talk. I know this isn't the best way to do things. People pick presidents like this, and they pick head coaches like this as well. It is part of the job, being able to communicate to the public and just be the CEO and be the face of the program. I knew Sharon Moore from the first time that he was up there a couple of years ago. I listened to him, and he's just got a presence about him, and he kind of commands the room, and you listen to him talk, you say, hey, this guy's head coaching material. Clink scale, I like listening to myself, but he doesn't necessarily come off as a head coach, but he comes off as somebody that you would want to play for and that you would run through a wall with for any of that. He's just a real motivational guy.
Danny, let me say this.
Well, you don't like that kind of stuff, Scar, but I'm just
saying. I think, listen, as a coordinator and as a head coach, obviously you like that guy that has that command presence, can stand up in front of, the whole defense and unify it and communicate and motivate. You like that ability to communicate and motivate. That's great. Okay. But what I want, if I'm looking at my guy, I tell you, like I said, a position coach is one thing, just teach technique, this, that, or whatever. But it comes down to the scheme guy is, okay, how are we going to line up and defend Ohio State and Michigan State? Now, it's not blocking and tackling. It's not, how do we teach, open field tackle? No, it's different, man. It's now, what's going to be our scheme? How are we going to fool them? How are we going to deceive them? And that's a whole nother deal that isn't just about the ability to communicate in front of the group. The leader, the head guy in defense has to be able to do all of that. You got to be able to, motivate your assistant coaches, motivate your players, have it all unified, have it all coordinated. But at the same time, you got to be able to look at the opponent and say, okay, how do we stop these guys? What's their best stuff? And what are we going to do to get it stopped? And how are we going to fool them? How are we going to scheme them? How are we going to give them headaches? And which we've done a lot of. The past two defensive coaches we've had have done a great job of giving the opponents headaches, not allowing them to really get a bead on what the heck we were doing. So that's the mad scientist, Danny. That ain't got nothing to do with out there communicating.
Well, we'll see how that ends up shaking out. The thing I was thinking about today, and we were going to talk about, and I know that I asked you to think about a player or position group, and you've already hinted at that. But where Michigan football is at right now in 2023, in these first couple of days of spring practice, they are in a great spot. I think we all know that. When you look at the players that they lost, the players right behind them that you'd look at and you say, okay, you can see how these guys, whether you want to talk about they could pick up the slack or be just as good in those positions, maybe even better as a player and maybe as a unit. You could see that. And I was just thinking, like, Scar, if I don't know how much you've paid attention to this, when they come out with the preseason poll next year, and I know what people think about preseason polls, but where do you think Michigan will be picked in the preseason poll?
I would have them. I think we have a little tougher conference. Because we got to go on. We got to go to Penn State. We got to go to Michigan State. To Maryland. We got more. 5 road games. It's going to be us and Ohio State, I would think. They probably might have us 2 because of that. But Denny, let me just talk. I know you wanted to ask me about the position group of. I think I covered all them groups.
All right. Well,
go ahead. Anyway, Denny, I would say they'd have us maybe, probably 2 in the Big Ten would probably be the.
Well, 2 in the Big Ten would be a surprise to me because based on where the game is being played and how Michigan has handled Ohio State, I think preseason-wise that you can't even make an argument with Michigan having their returning quarterback and Ohio State having, sure, a fine recruit there, but they have to break in a new quarterback and they're playing in Ann Arbor. If you are voting in a preseason top 25, you can't put Ohio State in front of Michigan. Yeah. My point
you're right, Danny. I'm making note. You're right. Michigan's got the quarterback back. We got Ohio State at home. I just think though, overall, I think our schedule, we got to go to Nebraska, to Minnesota, to Penn State, to Michigan State, to Maryland the week before all the Buckeyes. Well, it's going to be a tougher. It's going to be tough. And like I said, Coach Mo used to say, and I believe it because I started in 2 Michigan-Ohio State games. He used to say he'd rather play Ohio State on the road because you don't have as many distractions and all the tickets and all the BS. But anyway,
I'll give you this, Scar. Last year's schedule, I don't want to say it was but it's set up as great as a schedule could possibly from the non-conference to when they had to play their first road games, all of that. And, until the last one down at Ohio State, we know how that ended up. I just wanted to make the point that I think Michigan will be top 3. They'll certainly be top 5. They haven't been preseason top 5 since Lloyd Carr's last year. That's how far you have to go back, 2007. And when you start going back before that, you get into the early 2000s. But if you really want to start talking about top 3 and top 2, 1993, 1991. I mean, you're going back. You guys had a preseason top 5 that one year, didn't you? The 80 not 85 because 84, probably 86, huh?
I know the year we finished my last year, the year we finished number 2 in the nation, we weren't even ranked. So that stuff, the experts aren't always right. But yeah, I would see us being a top 5 in the country team. And then we very well could be based on what we've done with the quarterback back, the number 1 pick in the Big Ten. Yeah, that makes more sense. I haven't given much thought to that yet. I'm just trying to work on getting better. I would just focus on getting better and getting these players better.
Well, Scar, it was 85 your last year?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you guys beat Nebraska, and so you ended up number 2 in the final rankings, AP number 2. And so next year, the following year in 86, Michigan was preseason number 2. Preseason number 2. You keep going. If you look in 89, preseason number 1. So, yeah, I mean, like back then, it's been a while. My point on all that, it's been a while since Michigan was a top 5, top 4, top 3. You got to go back a little ways. They're in a really good spot. So let's go to that now. You're chomping at the bit, Scar, to talk about where the player or the position group that you're keeping an eye out on or an eye out for this spring. Where are you going?
Yeah, I talked about the 3 groups on defense that I really, really like that I think are going to be as good as we've been in the last 3 years. The one group that I'm concerned with, it's not about the 2 guys that will start the game because I think Jenkins and Graham are going to be as good. They'll be every bit as good, as the Mozzie Smith-Jenkins group. I said that was our strongest group, but I also thought we had good depth behind them. Okay, I like those 2 players big time. I'm concerned about Kenneth Grant and Benny, the 2 guys behind them. I want to look at. I'll probably sneak into practice here in a couple weeks. I'll definitely be looking at the spring game. But those are the two players I'm looking at for our whole team. I want to see what kind of depth we have at that interior defensive line position. So Grant and Benny, I want to walk away watching the spring football game saying those two can play. So we got 4 guys that can play in there, and that gives us, great depth at that position. But I think our offensive line has got a ton of depth. We've got great tight ends with depth. We got a lot of receivers are going to be competing. Our running back room is stocked. And obviously we still want to, we got to get our second quarterback some work and feel real confident with that. But interior D-line, Denny, is what I'm looking at first. Depth. Who's behind Graham and Jenkins? That's if I'm coaching this team and I'm coaching that defense, that's what I want to look at.
Yeah, and for me, I want to look at the opposite corner to Will Johnson. I know Jaden McBurrows is the only one that's got the game experience there, but there's 4, 5, 6 guys that you could mention that it could possibly end up being. And I say McBurrows, Josh Henschke, the publisher of the Maize and Blue Review, whether it's just his a guess from talking with people, or he really feels that, he continues to mention McBurrows as he thinks is the leader heading into spring. Things can change once you get out there in spring. And, so looking at number 1 out there at corner opposite of Will Johnson, number 1 on one side, number 2 on the other. I also want to look to these 2 transfers. They come in and people talk about them in just glowing terms. Ernest Hausman, the transfer from Nebraska, there at linebacker, where he fits in. And you already mentioned him earlier, Scar, as somebody that's going to be a plug and play rush edge, and that was Josiah Stewart out of Coastal Carolina. Those 3 players I'm looking at: McBurrows, Josiah Stewart, and Ernest Hausman. Those are my trio that I'm taking a look at.
Yeah, because I watched Stewart and I watched him look like just a real dominant player. But let's see, can he do those things against a Big Ten offensive tackle? But then here's another thing I'm looking at. I just want to talk about. Chris Partridge is on board. Okay, we kind of. I know you talked about him a couple days ago, but Chris Partridge, I've watched him coach. When he was at Michigan. Chris Partridge is animated. He's a great communicator. You talk about all those things, that you want in a coach. He is a charismatic guy. He's a great recruiter. And I'm glad to see him aboard. He'll figure out the system. He's coached, last time he was in Ann Arbor, we were running the Don Brown stuff, but he'll figure out the new system. Figure out what we're doing. He worked under Don Brown. He worked under DJ Durkin. So he's worked under a lot of different coordinators, but he's there. And I just want to say this because I think that it's important that, you bring guys in to coach, and they got to have that charismatic. It matters. It matters big time with recruiting. That when a guy walks in a room, he can keep the attention, and he can sell, and he can coach. And nothing against George Hilo, okay? Hilo's gone, but he was replaced, okay? He was replaced. Let's keep it real. And I think Jim sees Partridge in the same way I watched him coach. He's a charismatic guy. He's a good coach, and I think we may have taken a step up there from that standpoint. And those are decisions as a leader that, Coach Harbaugh has to make. I'm sure he loved Hilo. Probably was a great guy, nice guy, but he sees Partridge available, and he's like, hey, man, this guy can recruit and coach, and he's a charismatic guy, and let's get him aboard. And that's a dog-eat-dog world out there, but you got to win, man. You got to find a way to surround yourself with the best people. And if he's out there, go get him. And I applaud Coach Harbaugh for making tough decisions like that.
A dog-eat-dog world. Shane does not think that Minter is getting that job. If you had to ask me if I thought that Jesse Minter was getting that job, I looked at the other 3 or 4 candidates that are being talked about. I would say no. And I said that yesterday. I saw the defensive coordinator for Florida get I think the Cardinals job. today. So that doesn't mean that, sometimes you do see it though. Hey, now there's a rush on college coordinators. I don't think so either.
Denny, you got to remember, man. They're running. Look at the Eagle offense, and look at the Kansas City's offense. It's a lot of college stuff. You got to be able to defend the college stuff schematically. And a lot of these old pro guys defensively, they might not be able to figure it out like some of those college guys. So that's why Minter is probably a marketable guy. He worked in the pros for 4 years, and he knows the college game and how to scheme it and defend it, and that's why he's marketable.
It's a plum job. Not only did they go to the Super Bowl, but they led the NFL in sacks. They had the third most sacks all time since they've been recording them. Most of those guys, including Brandon Graham, will be back. And so it would be a great spot to walk into. It's not like they're, bringing them in and, putting them on the worst team or the worst defense in the NFL. They were the top defense in the NFL. So that would be great. And I don't know, it was funny. I don't know, one of the last games of the NFL season, they had the Manning cast, and Peyton Manning was made the joke like, yeah, all you guys always say this about halftime adjustments. There's no bigger lie in football than halftime adjustments. And he was talking about eating a hot dog or peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then I saw a guy that worked as a GM. He referenced the Manning cast and said, yeah, all you fans, you don't know what you're talking about when it comes down to the halftime adjustments. And then, I hear what they're saying, and yet I watched Michigan this year, and I don't know what Jesse Minter was doing at halftime, but he did something. Whatever they did, it worked. It worked. I say there's no such thing as magic, but it seemed like magic. Whatever.
Listening to a Manning talk about de-emphasizing that sounds like a guy who never coached, but halftime adjustments are important, but more importantly, you got to adjust every darn play as a defensive coach and an offensive coach. Denny, here's another thing going on. I know it ain't on our list, but I want to just talk about it real quick. They're talking about rule change, shortening the game, talking about the clock running after first downs. You know how we stop it now to move the chains, this and that. So they're talking about doing that. They want to speed up the game. Because there's so much throwing now, the games are long, incomplete passes. But I just want to pipe in on that because I think the concept of shortening the game hurts the team, hurts the better football teams. It hurts the team with more talent who is a better team. When I was a young coach and we were playing, I only had years when we didn't have many guys, 25 kids or so. We're playing a team with 50 guys. I want to shorten the game because I don't want it to be a fourth quarter game. I want to try to keep my guy. So we had the stopwatch, and every play we ran, we were maximizing every second in between plays without getting a penalty. You follow me what I'm saying? So we want to shorten the play, shorten the game. And I think that some of these rules they don't help someone like Michigan who has better players and who is a better team. So I'm looking at it. I just want to give my opinion on it because I know they're talking about rule changes, and it helps the inferior team, to more likely upset a team because there's less plays. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I looked at it. I glanced over it a little bit, and they said that they were doing it because of the length of the game for the safety of the player. But I don't believe the NCAA when they talk about the safety of a player. The one thing that they don't look at is the areas where they take these breaks after kickoffs where the money for those commercials, they want to make damn sure that they get that in. They could shorten up the game that way as well. But they want to make sure they get all that money in. So when I hear them talking about safety of the game, what they're really talking about is they want more money. They just want to get this thing over with, and they want to make sure that they can get the commercials in. So half of that, it's just like the officials. I can't give them the benefit of the doubt on this stuff because I know that they're not doing everything with the best interest of the game. Having said that, the stoppage of play on first down a couple of years ago, they made it where when you went out of bounds, only in the last 2 minutes that it was going to count. I'm all right with running the clock there. The one that I didn't like, and I'd have to look at it a little bit closer, is that they were going to keep the clock running on an incomplete pass. That seems stupid to me If they went and did that, that would seem like a drastic change. Running the clock on the first down, hey, if you want to do that, experiment or take a look at it, all right. And those other ones, the consecutive timeouts, a lot of those other ones, didn't seem like they were going to affect much of anything. It was the running clock after an incomplete pass sounds stupid to me.
Well, there's a lot of things they've done that have really helped the players. I read where Michigan's first practice was helmets and shorts. we never had any of that back in the day. We were full pads. We had 20 practices. So that's smart. I love it. It's better. It's safer for the players. It's, less wear and tear on their body. So those are good things. But, the kickoff, like if you really want to, help players out, kickoff team is one of the most, violent collisions. How about Kevin Sumler, Danny, coming to Maryland? The old Houston coach was a winner there. Texas A&M coach was a winner there.
But higher.
Did okay. He did okay at Texas A&M. Then he had troubles at Arizona. But anyway, he's at Maryland. He's a good coach. He'll be able to coach and recruit. They had a good one there with Dan Enos. So because he was tough to defend, man. He gave us a hard time. But I just wanted to throw that out here that Kevin Sumlin is in the Big Ten, working with Mike Loxley.
Dan Enos was a coach at Michigan for like 2 or 3 days a couple of years ago. Scarwood, if you could be the czar, not only of the telestrator, but the czar of college football, would you eliminate kickoffs from the college game?
If you really truly want to talk about doing something from a safety, that is the one play. Okay, I was on kickoff team. Now we had wedges back then. They could set up 4 guys and you had to go through the wedge. They outlawed that where you're not having wedge busters and you're getting a 60-yard, 50-yard running start. So some of those collisions are removed, but that is the most heavy collision play in football. Punt team is different. I know the XFL, USFL, they're doing some things that they were starting the game from a punt situation, which is a much safer deal. I could actually sign up for something like that to try to find a way to eliminate the kickoff, because it is a violent collision. Go ahead, Danny. But we didn't talk. I don't know if you talked about the Henderson kid being out.
I haven't. I'll mention that, but I'll put in 2 things now that I'm thinking about rule changes and everything else. I think that not only in NFL, but in college, they should get rid of this wedge or the bush push. That seems to be just a recipe for injury. You get all the guys and you're getting down lower. And I know coaches like the pad level and all this and getting in, but somebody's going to break their back. The other part is when you got a guy and they're kind of holding him up, the offensive line comes in barreling into their own guy and smashing him in there. Somebody's going to get killed doing that. They should get rid of that play. This doesn't have anything to do with safety, but
yeah, I just read, Danny, where the NFL was, because exactly what the Eagles were doing, that rugby scrum deal. They were their stats on converting first downs was unbelievable.
Get rid of it.
Yeah, we're talking about getting rid of that. But anyway, Henderson, the big kid from Arizona State, apparently he had to finish up some school or something. So that's something that's interesting, that he's not going to go through spring ball, and that's going to make things interesting. How someone's going to have a big advantage on him to go through spring football there.
Yeah, well, what makes it interesting is that when he first was coming in and transferring to Michigan, it was looked at like, oh, he would probably take one of those guard spots, and then both Zinter and Keegan come back. So then they're like, hey, he'll probably take over one of the tackle spots, the left tackle spot. And actually, I was looking, all the spring stuff on the Maize and Blue Review. Trevor McHugh, based on grades and Pro Football Focus and all this stuff, he had Henderson as the likely candidate, or the guy that was the leader for the left tackle position heading into spring. Now that he's not going to be able to play in spring, now you're talking about whoever it's going to be over there and whoever the top 2 guys are. How is Henderson going to get into summer and then fall camp to be able to potentially be the starter? Maybe it'll be like It'll be like McCarthy. He couldn't participate last year in spring, and Harbaugh will go in and say, we're going to have a competition.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about. Is Denny, you take this Jeff Percy. He's a kid that would probably, would have been a real candidate for that to take over at left tackle, and now he's not going to have an answer if he won that position until maybe a week before the first game. So instead, he might have been a guy that would just say, I'm going to transfer, and if Henderson was the guy they're going to go with. So. It's an interesting situation, but there's a lot of good players on the. It's a good problem to have if I'm coaching, but the players every single practice is going to matter. Every rep is really going to matter for a lot of these players on this Michigan football team as they go through spring practice.
Yeah. Hey, congratulations, Jeff Piercy. You won the left tackle spot, and then Harbaugh comes out in the summer. We're going to have a competition. We'll see. That's a tough one. I want to make another point about a rule change that I'd like to see. Maybe this has nothing to do with safety, but something that I watch enough, and I'm always like, they don't need to do it. If your knee touches the ground, you shouldn't be down in college football like it is in the pros. Nobody's touching you. You're doing nothing. If you're a quarterback and you go down and you get the ball and your knee touches, who cares? Pick the ball up and continue to play. If your knee goes down, you're not down in college football unless somebody is touching you. Then you are down. I would like to see him make that change. Here's a question for you, Scar, directed right at you from Sugar Shane, because he says, Scar, how do you feel about Michigan picking up 3 O-line transfers? And O-line is our deepest position unit, with 2 of them probably starting over kids who have waited 3 years to play.
Shane, I've talked about this, and I've been the player who grinded and got his butt kicked for 2-3 years, and then finally saw daylight in my 4th year to have an opportunity to start, and did everything that was asked of me to be a team guy and prepare and get better and go through the program. And, I had what I was told in recruiting. And now, I look at a guy like El Hadi, and you look at Percy, and you look at some of these guys, they weren't told none of that when they were getting recruited. Okay. And nobody was in college football 4 years ago, 3 years ago, because the transfer thing wasn't what it was, but it's a reality. A part of me feels bad for those kids, because they paid their dues, but it's a dog eat dog capitalist world we're in here in America, and it is what it is. And they've got to fight it off. They got to fight these transfers off, and nothing's going to be given to them. But but it is what it is, man. And we have a great deal of depth. Our coaches are I guess Clemson isn't doing it. Okay, I heard Clemson has not brought in any transfers. Okay, that could possibly help them recruiting high school kids. But, a lot of people are doing it now. Everybody's doing it. They're bringing the transfers in. It helps you if you make a mistake in recruiting. And it helps you if you just want to try to trade up a position group. You're not real happy with what you got. But it's out there. That position group will be strong for us. Denny, the same thing happens in high school. Okay, we have a thing in the state of Michigan called school of choice. I've seen it happen many times at different schools, where a kid will go through middle school in the community. He'll go, 9th grade football, play JV football, maybe play a little bit as a junior and be the next guy ready to go as a senior, paid his dues, gonna start as a senior, and bam, swoops in. Here comes some transfer kid from some other school, school of choice kid who takes the position. So the same thing is happening in high school, and it is what it is, man.
Yeah, I would add that it's just the way college football is playing out now over the last 2 years. You have to factor in name, image, and likeness. Previous to the transfer portal, if you were going to transfer, we all know that you had to sit out a year. But now you could jump right in, and you have the freedom as a player. And we all know that Michigan if you look at the top 25 teams in college football, more than half of those teams are promising kids name, image, and likeness money before they step on the campus. That's just the reality. I know we get, and people hate hearing about it after a while. Why isn't Michigan doing whatever else? And I get it. It gets tiring to talk about. But Michigan has decided that they're not going that route. We know that right now. And so their response to it is, hey, let's get into that transfer portal and we can make up for it there. Because if Michigan was not able to get top 100 talent and they were not able to bring anybody off the transfer portal, where this program is headed right now, and it's in the great position, they're going to be a top 5 team preseason, you could say, wow, this team, there's no way that they could stay up at the top of college football. But the portal, potentially, they can by bringing guys in, and it makes it a lot more like the NFL. Every year, you've got your certain guys under contract, but you're cutting guys because of a salary cap. You're moving other guys in free agency. You got guys all over the place, and then you start the new year, and it's a new team. It does take away some of the camaraderie and everything that you're talking about, Scar, the guys you come in on. You come in with a recruiting class of 25. It would be a surprise now if you end up with two-thirds of those guys. I would imagine just a third of them where, there's always going to be attrition even back in the day. But I would imagine that 2/3 of the guys are going to be gone, transferring somebody else, and leaving the program that way.
Yeah, it helps the coaches if they make a mistake in recruiting. Okay, it helps them there. If some guys just are really, really aren't panning out and you have a weak position group. But listen, as a player, if I'm getting recruited, okay, I'm going to take a real close look at that. How many transfers are Michigan State bringing in compared to Iowa or Michigan if I'm getting recruited by all those schools? If I'm a head high school coach like I was, I'm going to do my research inside out for my players so I can really give great insight to, listen, man, you go to this school, they're not bringing transfers. You go to this school, they are. So that's, it's just like hiring from within, man. It's the same thing with coaches. You want to work, you want to go to that, you want to go work for that guy who's hiring from within. Just like Clinksdale, he came to Michigan probably believing. I don't know how that discussion went with Harbaugh, but it's the same kind of deal. You hire from within. One other thing, Denny, I read, and I said this, that Michigan will convert one big offensive tackle to tight end. For some of our big short yardage packages, we had Big Honigsford the last 2 years, big 285-pound tight end. Noah Stewart, backup tackle, a guy that we haven't really heard his name, but guess what? He's going to have I think a 40 or 30 number on him, 6'7", 283. And so that's going to, I'm glad to see that because we got to have a big tight end for our short yardage stuff. And so that was a guy that made the switch from tackle to tight end. There might be another one as we go through spring football, but that was some information out there I just read.
I'm glad you brought that up. Honingford, I don't know how much it gets talked about in Michigan circles, but Honingford pancaking 44, who was like the top defensive line recruit in the country, a 5-star, played one of the greatest games that I ever saw when he played against Penn State with the sacks and the fumbles and the guy was incredible, pick sixes and everything else. Honingford took him on the goal line, pancaked him, decleated him, and drove him into the ground. It's one of the greatest individual blocks that I've ever seen. Blank is talking about several NFL teams rotating offensive linemen in to keep those guys fresh. I'm not saying you're wrong, Blank. What I'm saying is I watch the NFL as much as anybody, and I don't remember several NFL teams rotating guys in. So you'd have to give me an example of a team or two, and then I would research it. But I don't remember teams doing that. There might be a guy that was coming back from injury, and so they'd rotate a guard in there, maybe something like that. Maybe you're looking for in a passing situation, some kind of tackle because somebody you're trying to protect. But I don't think that it was a strategy. But I could be wrong, Maybe I missed that.
Danny, I've worked with and talked to and listened to a lot of different offensive line coaches, and they're as diverse in their thoughts as any other group. I've had some guys that they don't want to rotate anybody. They want them guys to just work together, and the hell with the second team guy. I was one of them coaches that I didn't give a damn. I wanted repetition. I wanted depth. So I rotated a bunch of guys with my offensive line when I was coaching because I wanted depth. I wanted development. I wanted guys playing, and I didn't care about that concept of, just these 5 guys get all the reps. So every coach has a different philosophy about that. Depends on the coach. Yeah, Honigberg was a dog, and that's it. We got to find a guy. You got to have what we want to run, what Michigan wants to run. We can't have imposters. We can't have these little skinny guys running around playing tight end. We got to have guys that can block and catch the ball. So, to run the stuff we want to run.
There you go. Blank gave me 2 teams. I'll look into it. The Cowboys and Eagles. The Eagles had the best offensive line in football. Lane Johnson got hurt late in the year, so they were rotating some guys in, but he's saying it's not due to injury. So I'll look into that and see if I can remember about that. Scar was great, man. I'm going to take away a lot from this show, but I'll try to remember this in the spring practice. It is what it is, and it's a dog-eat-dog world when it comes to football.
Spring practice, Danny, I remember going through it, man. I know what these players are going through. There's pressure on them. They're putting pressure on themselves. They are competing. They are up against it every day, competing against the guys in their room to just play great, man. And you have a bad practice, you can get moved back in the depth chart. So, and I've seen it. So I'm looking forward to trying to sneak up to a practice, and if not, I'll definitely take a peek at the spring game.
Well, when you're on the phone there, Scar, say, hey, I do this podcast with Fithy, and he wants to come to practice too. What do you say? throw that out there, Scar. See what they say.
Okay. Aaron likes the podcast. All right, Aaron, we're working hard over here, man, trying to bring the wisdom.
We'll see you down at the practice field. All right, Scar, we'll see you next week.
All right, go Blue.
There he is, Jim Scarcelli. Thanks for joining.